There we
All
go.
right, well, welcome everybody who's joining us. Thanks for being here today. We'll give everybody a few minutes to log in and then we'll get started. You guys are in for a treat today. It's going to be an extra special episode. So thank you for joining us. Great panelists, tons of great information. You're absolutely going to love it. And we're going to try to save some time at the end for Q&A. If you have questions during, feel free to throw them up in the chat. Our panelists have also generously volunteered to put their contact info into the chat, so you'll be able to reach out to them if you have follow-up questions that we don't have time to get to. But again, thank you so much to all of you for being here. Go about one more minute, let people keep logging in. Feel free to put your name and where you're from in the chat so we know who's here. Throwing my email in the chat, so if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer that as always. Feel free to reach out. All right, we'll still probably have a few people log in and just tell them that they missed the best part. Whenever somebody's late when I'm presenting, I always, no matter what I'm saying, I'll stop right in the middle and say, and punctuality is the most important, feature for any leader in our industry. And I try to make them feel bad. But no, thank you so much for being here. This is episode 3 of our series, Real versus Feel. And again, quickly, the premise of the series is that we tend to make decisions based on feel. I feel like this is a great idea. I feel like we should just do that. We use emotion and just our gut feel. When we actually use real, which is data, statistics, and research, we tend to make much better decisions. So we've done a few episodes. The first one was on KPIs. The second episode was on surveying members and gathering data from members so that we can improve the member experience and create better experiences for them. And this one is all about employee engagement and gathering feedback from employees so you can provide a better employee experience. And I have to tell you that as I reached out to guests, it was hard to find guests. Most people are not doing this. And I found this data that I thought was really interesting. It cost $4,000 or so to hire and $1,000 to onboard. So it's about $5,000 every time you bring somebody on board, plus the time, the effort, the headache that goes in to bringing new people on board when you lose team members. And let's not forget the member experience. They can't stand when all of a sudden there's a new person at the welcome desk or a new person teaching class when there's constant turnover. Plus, in this area where it's harder to find talent, you're creating a bad reputation for yourself. You're that company that has a lot of turnover and it doesn't appeal to people to want to work for you. So this is going to be very, very important today. Again, super excited to have these panelists. You're going to get some very valuable information. So just to get started right off the bat, first I'll introduce Karen, and she's the executive director of LifeWorks of Southwest General. Fun fact about Karen, she's watched the sunset from the Eiffel Tower, floated in the Dead Sea, and water skied on the, is that Ionian Sea?
Ionian.
Ionian.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the Ionian Sea, the Ionian Sea. But I think the most significant thing about Karen is she runs one of the best facilities in my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio. So that's pretty awesome. So Karen, why don't you tell the audience a little bit more about yourself?
Okay, well, I'm the executive director here at LifeWorks at Southwest General. I've been here 20 years now, almost, raising my kids here. It's great. LifeWorks is considered a department of the hospital, but we're a for-profit department. COVID, we're still like 25% down, I think, on net paying members. I don't include frozens and those kind of accounts. Staffing, we're probably down. When we kind of returned, we were already down like 9 full-time equivalents, FTEs. I speak in FTEs, so 9 FTEs, and we're still running pretty lean. So right now, this topic of engagement and employees and getting their feedback is crucial to our business at this point. So yeah, I teach aerobics, right? Take English riding lessons, own a horse now. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for donating your time to be here and helping educate our audience. Next up, we have David Connell, or as he is known in the industry as DC. He's the director of sport at the University of Hertfordshire Sports Village, which is near London, so just a little east of Cleveland, Ohio. Fun fact about David is that he, at the current company that he runs, he couldn't get an interview for 19 years ago. He begged and he pleaded. He said, if somebody drops out of this, race for this job, can I please at least have an interview? And now 19 years later, he's running the company. So pretty cool story. And of course, known as DC. And I don't come across this often, but my oldest son is David Christopher, and he is also known as DC. So now I know two DCs. So tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thanks ever so much, Chris, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm DC. I've worked here 19 years, as Chris says. Been in this role as Director of Sport about 6.5 years, and basically I lead a organisation. We're part of the university here, just 20 miles north of London. We're a full commercial facility, about 6,500 member club. Do lots of other stuff as well. We have lots of national and international sport that takes place on site. But the reason I'm very interested in employee feedback and staff engagement and the benefits of that is 6 or 7 years ago, we were really struggling to grow our business and really struggling to differentiate ourselves, particularly from either the budget clubs or the kind of high-end clubs in our area. And we made a conscious effort to really differentiate ourselves through staff engagement and customer engagement. And went on a journey to basically become the best in our class in doing that, and really went on this journey of listening to our staff and trying to improve the engagement as a result of that. And that's had significant benefits for us as an organisation, which obviously we'll hopefully share during the course of this session.
Awesome. Thank you, DC. And finally, our third panelist is Marissa Hoff. She'll tell you more about herself, but a fun fact is that she is born in Colombia and has never had a sip of coffee, which is a little odd for a Colombian. But another fun fact is I met Marissa many, many years ago. I owned a small personal training studio, and it was a good little studio. And Marissa came in as a client. And within less than a week of being there, she's like, so listen, you guys are doing a great job with the training and all that, but this place is horrible. Your merchandise is terrible. The way your file system is going, the collateral that you're putting out, she's like, I just need to fix it. And she fixed it. And ever since, we've run successful businesses throughout the years. So I have to thank Marissa for a lot of the reason I got to where I'm at today. But Marissa, tell everybody a little bit more about yourself.
Oh, thank you, Chris. And thanks to ASF for having us today. Excited to be here with these great panelists. As Chris mentioned, we've worked together starting in 2010, I believe. We opened his second location, which was a full service health club here in the LA area with all the elements, group X, personal training, childcare, the works. And some of the stuff that we did led us to get on this circuit of sharing best practices with other businesses and telling others about what we were doing at Stevenson Fitness. And that kind of led into what we're doing today. And I think part of the reason why I'm here today is when Chris was struggling to find panelists, I started calling up some people that I knew in different areas, PayPal and Goldman Sachs and TaylorMade, and they do a lot of work in the employee engagement area. And so I did learn a ton from them about what other industries are doing with employees. And then we'll share a couple tidbits that worked really well for us when we ran our health hub here in LA.
Awesome. Thank you, Marissa. Appreciate that. So let's jump right into it because we've got a lot to cover. And I know you guys have a ton of information to share with the audience, but what's funny in our industry is you hear about member feedback all the time, net promoter scores and surveys and what Blair does with MXM. There's a lot of people aggressively going after member feedback. We know when we get feedback from members, we're able to create a better member experience, which leads to more referrals, better retention, more revenue in general. So we know that the important things. But I open this sharing the statistics and the cost that's involved when you lose team members, right? So just to put it out there, we'll start with DC on this one. Why is it important to get employee feedback?
Thanks, Chris. Obviously a great question to start with, and I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, but obviously we don't have the time for this. But I do feel really passionate about this, as I've already stated. And the simple answer, and I can go on to give a number of examples, is it helps you drive improvement in your business. Just as taking member engagement obviously helps you drive improvements in your business too, by adapting to what your members needs. Listening to your staff, eliciting feedback from them, and then acting on that feedback can drive improvements, and in every area of your business. So just to give you some of the examples around some of the areas that we've seen it in, that's everything from employee attraction and retention, obviously member attraction and retention. By listening to our staff around feedback, we've made changes to our operational procedures. We've made changes and ways that we can reduce our utility costs, which is something that's obviously really big at the moment in terms of them going up significantly in the UK and other areas of the world. But yeah, so the overarching theme is it helps us drive improvements in our business. I'd use an analogy as well around coaching. You know, if you're a coach of an athlete or a team, a football team, a soccer team, or something like that, and you never listen to what your team think, how do you know whether they're happy with what's going on? How do you know whether they think there's things that could be done differently? So by doing that, we get lots and lots of feedback. To give you a kind of working example of that, once we started to listen to feedback from our staff and ask them about what they thought, we realised one of their biggest issues about them giving good service to our members was that they were trying to answer phone calls and deal with customers at the same time. So we were trying to be all things to all people. And back then, we ran our phone call service from the moment we opened to the moment we closed at night. So 6:30 a.m. till 10:30 p.m. at night, people could phone us at any time. And we thought we were giving a really good service to our members as a result of that. And when we stopped and listened to our staff, their feedback was, actually, we're giving a really poor service because I'm trying to deal with the customer on the phone and I'm not doing that very well because there's a queue of people in front of me. And I'm trying to deal with the people in front of me, but I can't deal with that properly because I'm trying to deal with the customers on the phone. So we then went back to them and said, what's the solution? And the solution in their eyes was for us to stop answering phone calls during normal hours and have just a 4-hour window a day where we set up, in effect, an internal call centre. So people could only phone us between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m, but we staffed those phone calls and those phone centres separately. We were then able to take the calls properly, deal with the calls, direct people to online versions of interacting with us as well, by downloading apps, etc., etc. And it meant that outside of that time, they could deal face-to-face with the customers. So what seemed initially as a kind of, we thought that would have a negative impact on the service we give to our customers, had a really positive impact on the service, because we started answering all the phone calls, not missing dropped calls, and our customer satisfaction went up, and our staff were really happy that they could then give the service they wanted to, both to people on the phone and in person. So that's one, real example of how listening to our staff made a massive difference.
I love that, DC. And just to add on, sometimes when you're in a leadership role and you're not in the trenches, stuff completely makes sense. And then you actually ask the people that are executing what you're asking. They're like, hey, this is impossible. So I think that's a good way to see what's really going on. Because again, I feel like this is a great service. Real, they just can't accomplish it. So therefore, both of the services diminished.
Yeah, and I think there's two really important overarching points, Chris, for all of this for people is, firstly, and when I mentioned this when we spoke the other day, is you have to be prepared to understand that perception is reality. So, as a senior leader in my organisation, if I think all of my staff think what we're doing is brilliant, and they tell me otherwise, doesn't matter how much I disagree with the way they think, and 18, 19-year-olds working for me might think very differently to me at the age of 47. I've been brought up differently, worked 30 years, etc. But you have to accept perception's reality, and you have to change that perception. Otherwise, you've got people who think things aren't right, and yet you're trying to employ them to do a good job and provide a good service. And secondly, and just as importantly, if you ask for feedback, you have to act on it. Nothing worse than saying to your staff, yeah, give us the feedback, you listen to them and you ignore everything they say. That's worse than not asking for it in the first place. So, they're two really important things.
Excellent. Thank you so much, DC. So Karen, what are some of your goals with going after employee feedback?
Yeah, so a lot that DC already mentioned. I'll just add on to what he already said it to everyone. I think a big thing too to realize is that when you get employee feedback and you give them opportunity to not only tell you what's going wrong, gives them opportunity to tell you what's going right, and it gives them opportunity. What we use here is, hey, who should we be recognizing? It kind of to help build that team. So there's another dimension to this, and it's about building that team, allowing them to recognize their coworker because they really want to. They care about this person. This person did something for them, so it's really cool. And I think also then once you do get the feedback, and I think DC touched on, is that you have to close that loop. Just like member, feedback, you have to go back to that staff member. Hey, thank you. This is what we did or didn't do, and why not? I think that's very important. And regarding the processes out there, I agree 110% with DC. I'm in the office. I am so far removed. So unless I'm out there with you, I will not make any decisions or even bring to my management team. We will not make a decision without the frontline staff's engagement to what we need to do for the most part. They're the ones handling it. Like when COVID happened, especially, how did we all get through COVID? It's the feedback, it's the constant back and forth between the frontline staff and those making the decisions, like, hey, how's this going? What do we need to be doing? And they really, they stepped up to it. So, I mean, I think without knowing what they're thinking or feeling, if we're going to go to the feel, you can't make those real decisions to help your business thrive and to help them thrive. And that's part of our mission statement. We want them to thrive here just as much as we want the business.
Yep. Yeah, that's fantastic. Oh, go ahead, DC.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, Karen. And I think you said some really valid points there, in particular around that we are far removed from it. But if you give them the opportunity to actually give feedback on things before we discuss that or send that information out to customers as well. So for example, every promotion that we do or every social media post where we can, we get our front of house team to check it. Because if there's an issue, it's them that are dealing with it. If we send something out that doesn't make sense, whether that's a sales message, whether that's about a closure that's upcoming, whether it's a promotion we're doing, if we think it all makes sense, but then they get 100 emails or 100 phone calls about this doesn't quite make sense to us, we've created negative workload for them rather than just taking 30 seconds to say, are you happy with this message? And little things like that can make a massive difference to how much staff feel they're listened to, but also how engaged they are with the business, because it's a positive rather than them dealing with so much negative feedback, maybe about a message that we just don't understand how to put that across.
Yeah, and to both of your points, I've been taking notes this whole time. I think it can't be cemented more that if you aren't going to do anything with feedback, don't ask for it. That's worse. You're better off just not asking for feedback, whether it's members or staff, if you're not going to act on it. And then when you're talking about, Karen, it was a great point on closing the loop. When you get feedback, there are sort of three ways to deal with it. Either you use it, like you act on it just like it is, or maybe there's some sort of compromise. You're saying, okay, I see where we could do some things different. And then the third is explain why it's done a certain way. So, hey, I appreciate all the feedback. Here's why we have to do it that way, because sometimes just the way we don't understand what the front line's going through, they don't understand what we're going through as well. But it's either some sort of compromise, you act on it, or you at least explain it. I think that's really, really good. The other thing too is, Karen, I like how you said, use it as a form of recognition. Recognize your team members so that it's not just about data to make improvements, but you can recognize your staff. And in addition to all these valuable things, it also just gives your staff a voice, which they're going to be appreciated, because as we learned in doing the research just to find panelists, and we lucked out with 3 incredible panelists, a lot of people aren't doing this. So you're going to differentiate yourself as a facility saying, hey, we actually survey you guys on a regular basis, or we do this sort of thing to encourage your feedback. Your staff's going to appreciate that. So Marissa.
Yeah, and I think everyone's made really valid points and really important things. Just in general, there's so many statistics about how this improves your business on paper, whether it's revenue or anything else in that regard. And I think the analogy of happy wife, happy life, it's kind of the same thing with happy employees is going to equal happy members. But it's funny, when we were starting to think about this, in my mind, I was thinking solely along the lines of like a net promoter score, like, is the employee happy? And that's a big part of employee feedback. But, as I was talking to the people at PayPal, and Karen, you mentioned a little bit about this too, that they use Bravo badges. So they have the employees give Bravo badges to other people as a way of recognize them. Over at Goldman Sachs, they were using feedback to assess the efficacy of their onboarding program and to see how things were going. And feedback can be as simple as, you're in a big meeting. We got some great tools as we were learning about this, and you've got everyone on staff on Zoom now because we're so used to it. And you can use certain features to make sure that people are engaged with the meeting itself. So not just the company, but give us a thought on how you feel about this, or everyone put in so that people are. So there's a lot of different ways to use employee feedback, not just assess their happiness, but assess the efficacy of the programs that you're doing, make improvements in general. And then a lot of them also use pulse points. So even in Net Promoter Score, you might send something to your members. Would you refer this facility to friends or family? And there's a separate one where you could just say, how was your workout today? And employees are the same thing. You could do this overall survey about how they feel about the company and the culture and all that stuff. But from time to time, whether it's, let's say January, when they're overwhelmed, and they're getting a lot of people in. Just a pulse point, like how's it going? Short, simple, easy, but just to do a pulse check on how people are feeling. So there's a lot of different ways that I hadn't considered that are really so helpful in running the business that employees can really help out.
You know, really good. It's actually a perfect segue. I'm going to kind of skip around a little bit. So I apologize, panelists, for jumping around with questions, but you kind of led us into the third question we had prepared, and that was specific methods of gathering feedback. So remember, if you have questions, put them in the chat. We'll answer those throughout. But I know everybody's dying to know, what are the specific, we've talked about the benefits and how we utilize that, but what are the specific things that people can do the minute they, get off this webinar and the tools that they can use? Go ahead, Marissa. You're on a roll. Keep going.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I can't wait to hear about Office 5 from DC, but I know when we were at Stevenson Fitness, SurveyMonkey is a very free and easy tool where you can do a very easy Net Promoter Score for your employees. Would you recommend working here to friends or family, and just get a number. I mentioned Poll Everywhere, which is something that you can use in a Zoom meeting to do something like a Wordle. So if you were going into January and you're everyone on the Zoom meeting and you're getting everyone pumped up, and you'd say, okay, how's everyone feeling about how prepared they are for our January rush? And everyone would put in a word, then it would populate a Wordle that shows where everyone is. So not only is that keeping people engaged in the meeting, but it's giving you a sense of how people are feeling. There's a lot of bigger tools that companies are using, like Culture Amp, Glint. Those are specifically designed to look at employee engagement. But very simply, even something like the Gallup Q12 will give you some very specific questions that you can ask your employees that will give you a true sense of where they are in regards to how they feel for your company.
Can you, I know that we had talked offline about this, but it was the, I think it might have been PayPal, and correct me if I'm wrong, but how they utilize newsletters.
Oh yeah, so they use.
I thought this was fascinating.
So they use Polite Mail. And so when they send out employee newsletters, they can, and we can do this in SurveyMonkey and MailChimp too. You can see what the open rate is. But with Polite Mail, they were getting a sense of how long employees were spending reading an email, what links they were clicking on. Again, MailChimp and SurveyMonkey will do that to a certain extent. But what I think was super helpful was that they were using this information to see if there was better ways to inform their employees. And I think we all kind of struggle with that. When there's something really important, there's a big change, even what we just went through COVID. How do you tell everyone? Because not everyone reads their emails. So if they're not reading their emails, then how am I communicating? Maybe if I send a video and they click on that. So it's just another tool just in regards to seeing how engaged they are with the information that they're giving you. But again, there's different levels. I'm sure PayPal has a lot of resources that maybe some of our smaller clubs might not have, but even just assessing whether your employees are reading your emails, that would be a great first start.
Well, thanks for sharing that, because I think, when we think feedback, we think it's only about going after the obvious. Hey, what do you think? And all these different types of surveys. But I love that you explained that, because that's another way to see, what are they reading? How long are they staying there? Are they clicking on it? Because then we can say, to your point, maybe there are better ways to communicate, because we can try to force people, we asked about communication. You don't say if you're a good communicator, the person receiving the info does. So that would let you know maybe there's better ways to go about this. That's excellent. Karen,
Yeah.
What do you guys do?
So for us, we have used Gallup in the past. And can I just go back to something that I think we all
we're moving on.
No, I have to. Going back. Going back, Chris.
Course.
That's it. Doing it.
Of course.
Anyway, I have to be honest, like after COVID and coming from reopening, I was different. Like there was a point too, and I don't know if anybody else is feeling this way. It's like, I don't know if I cared. I mean, you're so bombarded and you have to get yourself out of this. But your staff are going through the exact same thing. Where are they at? What are they doing? And I think we need to recognize that. So I've come out of it probably about 6 months ago, 7 months, where I feel like I'm like, going well, but it did affect me. And I think people need to be conscious of that maybe you haven't been doing anything. And maybe you went through a little, like a spurt, like I did. It was like, you know what, I have to just try to get the business to survive at this point, right? And so just to do anything. And I think, you know, what Marissa said, there's some really good things that you could do free. What we do here too, and take it, we do quarterly rounding. So it's asking specific questions at least once a quarter to every single employee that you have, that, you know, the management sits down with them, takes them away from wherever they're at, and sits down in the office and has meaningful conversations, because that's where you want to get some things about them. What's working well, what's not working well. And it's interesting what people will tell you. And then see what are their future growth plans? What is it? And that's one of the questions on Gallup. You know, has anyone talked to you about, you know, your future? Have you been recognized within 7 days? And the questions seem a bit off, but it works. It's really valid. So I think those things like quarterly rounding, where you have sit down for meaningful conversations, because usually if we're walking by, say, hey, how's it going? And you chat real quick, you're not going to get the feedback that maybe you're looking for that will make a difference for them and for what you're looking for. Also, you know, for every employee that starts, I sit down with them 90 days after, you know, they started, because I have prepared it to go over the mission and, you know, what the vision is here. It's also to get their feedback, because I open it up to them. So what do you think? You know, how are we doing? Because they have fresh eyes, because maybe it's something as simple that I'll never forget. Someone came in, it's the way we filed. And she's like, can we just file it? Like, I think it was just, she wanted to go alphabetical. I'm not sure how it was, but it's like, yes. Oh my God. Yes. You know, they have this clarity that we appreciate and that we so want. So, for us, it's the quarterly rounding, a 90-day review with everyone, asking those specific questions, because the other part of this is that you want them to be honest with you and to feel that they sit in a comfortable enough space that they can be honest, especially if it's not anonymous.
Yep. I love that you brought up face-to-face, because Marissa gave us a bunch of very tangible tools that involve technology. And sometimes, you know, our industry is more innovative now than it's ever been. And the world is, right? Everything's going tech. But you can't dismiss face-to-face, right? Taking the time to sit somebody and, like you said, get that honest feedback. Those quarterly roundings, that's I took some notes on that. That's really, really good. DC, what do you got for us? Besides, Marissa already teed it up that you have to talk about Office Vibe.
No problem at all. I think, and just before I get on to that, I think the other point to make is when we talk about feedback, we so often think we're going to get negative feedback. So it becomes a scary thing. If I open up my business and I start asking my employees for feedback, it's going to be negative. It's not. You know, the vast majority of feedback will actually be positive. You know, in the end, they're employees. Hopefully, most of us are running good organizations, and there will be some areas for improvement. But, you know, please, I think that's the biggest message. Don't think you're going to ask for feedback and suddenly you're going to get 99 of 100 staff all say, we think it's rubbish working here. You know, it's not like that. So that's my first point. In terms of things we use, Marissa's mentioned Office Vibe. So we heard of a tool. I've probably heard of Office Vibe maybe 5 years or so ago. One of those meetings where somebody mentioned it, Googled it, logged on and set it up and started using it probably same day, because that's just the sort of person I am. Get on an act straight away. But it's a great tool. There's a free version of it. There's a kind of freemium version of Office Vibe. And basically what it allows us to do is we set every member of staff up in Office Vibe, put in their name and email address, and it starts to send them surveys that measure 12 different facets of employee engagement. And over time, it builds up a picture on those 12 different facets of employee engagement around what your staff think and how they rate you. And it also asks them the employee net promoter score, which Marissa's already made reference to. And it builds up a really lovely picture of what your staff think, and it rag rates that in the reports that you see when you log into Office Vibe. So you can basically see of the people that have answered each question related to each metric, how many of them have given you a red score, an amber score, or a green score, and the proportion of those. So you can see, you know, you might have scores that are equal, but they've been made up. You've got lots more passives in effect in one of those, whereas you've got lots more kind of promoters in another. It's really, really great. It then sends an email every few days to each member of staff, asking them to complete a survey, a weekly survey, where it asks them different questions. And then it sends people that you set up as managers that you want access to this, a summary of the answers to those questions. And it does all this anonymously. So every couple of days, I get a great email into my inbox giving me all the latest feedback that we've received from staff and which questions they've been asked and what their answers were. And it also gives you the chance to respond to anything that you need to, again, anonymously or saying who you are. And that gives us, I reckon we probably get 30 to 40 pieces of staff feedback a week from that tool. And we've got a full-time equivalent staff numbers of about 50. So, we're probably getting 80% of staff giving us feedback every week on Office 5, and that's the version we use is totally free. Some of the other things that we've done that have worked really well, I run staff briefings. During COVID times, it was weekly, but now it's monthly. But within those, we use a tool called Mentimeter, which I'm guessing people will have heard of as well, probably, which is a kind of webinar, in virtual scenario tool where you can ask questions and people can anonymously answer those questions. You can get a really quick idea about what people think about certain issues and good, bad or indifferent, and give their feedback, and that's been really useful. You've said about face-to-face, face-to-face meetings, general conversations, corridor conversations, we find just as useful. And then we also use a platform called Glassdoor, which I think is a UK-based website, but it's where employees can leave reviews about what they think about their employer. And you have to enter a pro and a con. So it's really good in terms of getting both sides of things. But we were really simple. We asked our staff, we said, we want you to go and leave reviews. They're anonymous. We want you to leave reviews, good, bad or indifferent. And actually they've left some brilliant reviews, and we're kind of rated 5 out of 5 as an employer, which is brilliant. And that then helps attract future staff to work for the organisation. But there's certainly some of the things, Office 5 in particular, the freemium side of that, which is a brilliant tool to use to garner that employee feedback.
That's great information. And I think it was important that you meant that you had an 80% response rate, because that is something with any survey, whether it's members or employees. If you don't have enough people responding to your stuff, then you just don't have enough to have real scientific data, right? So you have to encourage those response rates. For those that are listening too, this can be overwhelming. You've now heard of about 50 different platforms, including all these face-to-face meetings that you need to be having for feedback. So what I always recommend is, and I think this came up earlier, and I can't remember who said it, but sometimes people hear information that just don't do anything, right? And that could be because it's just overwhelming, right? Yeah. You're like, oh my gosh, now what am I supposed to do? So I think, always take small steps. If you're not doing any sort of employee data acquisition right now, pick one thing that you heard today that sounded like something that appealed to you and implement that. You could think what would matter most out of all of those tools, but just start simple. Implement one thing, get good at it, make it a facet of what you do. And then when that starts to be effective and becomes part of your systems, then you can start to add on to that. But don't be overwhelmed thinking, oh my gosh, I got to download 17 different platforms and start implementing them tomorrow. It's not that at all. Just pick one, something that you feel will make a difference, and implement that. Marissa, your hand was up.
Yeah, just when DC was sharing that about Office 5, which sounds really cool. And by the way, what was the other one? Mentor meeting?
Mentimeter is a really simple tool where you can basically it's a survey tool within meetings. So you can use it for Mentimeter, yeah.
Okay, very cool. But as you were sharing the stuff from not only Glassdoor, but mainly from Office 5, part of what all companies should be doing is during the interview process, when you're explaining what you do and why you do what you do, you're going to tee it up by saying, what is important to us is communication with our employees, listening to what you have to say, and we will be asking you on a regular basis, thank you for that link, about how you're feeling, because it's super important for us to be connected with you in two ways. So from the very beginning, before they even start, they're already hearing how important their voice is going to be in what you do. And then even in the onboarding process, just like anything you do, you're going to tell them why this is so important, why it makes such a difference to the company, why it makes such a difference to the members. Everything that you do has a real solid purpose behind that. So when they're getting these surveys, hopefully they're excited about participating and being a part of that. I know there's huge companies like J&J that do these annual surveys that get a lot of participation, and that's because it's ingrained in every department. We need to have 95% participation. This is important. So if it's set up from the beginning, I think you're going to have a lot more success in participating.
Yeah, and to your point, Marissa, you also want to make sure that you're doing, there are right ways to write surveys and wrong ways to write surveys. You can write them unintentionally be very leading. They can be too long. So it's definitely worth, if you're going to embark on this, and you should, because obviously you're hearing how important this is to the success of all the panelists' businesses, make sure you research the best practices so that you do it right. It's the right length, the right type of questioning, and all of those things to make sure that they're truly effective. So moving on, was there ever a time when you received feedback that just kind of blew your mind, or was way, we talk about feel versus real, where it went so against feel that you were just like, geez. I mean, I will tell you that, so I'm a big believer in net promoter score. I think it's super important. And I would, in my all staff communications, every single week, I would put the new net promoter score. And those of you that are familiar with net promoter score, as our panelists are, it tends not to jump. It doesn't switch 20 points. So, it goes up 2, down 3, this, but I was so into it that I was sharing it every single week. And I would say, and here's a couple comments and all this stuff. And at one staff meeting at the end, I asked for feedback, and they said, if we have to hear net promoter score one more time, we're leaving. It just, we understand that it's important to you, but we don't need to hear that it went up 1 point last week and down 1 point this week. Monthly or quarterly would be fine. We're all motivated. We understand the importance. So in my feel, I was like, no, everybody wants to hear this as much as I do. But I was surprised, right? But it made sense. Therefore, I backed off immediately of shoving that down their throats all the time. So we'll start with you, Karen. Is there any time that feedback just blew your mind, surprised you, or was way off from what you were thinking?
So it did kind of surprise me and took me back, like one of my management team, and, over some big stuff, and we're all working together, and I rounded on her. So I sat down to say, hey, let's just talk, which is something really easy to do. Had my questions. I give them questions in advance, so they can either send me their responses in email, or they could just bring them to the meeting. So this way they have it, they're prepared. That's another big important thing. You have the people prepared if you're going to sit down and talk to them. And she's like, yeah, I think I want to cut my hours, and I would love to have a position here where I could be half time. So we had that conversation, and because the way we had that conversation, and I was listening, which was huge. I was sitting there listening. Now it may have took almost a year and a half, but we did get her to halftime, and it's working out great for the organization and for her. But it did take me back, because I was like, what? It was a major position. I'm like, well, how are we going to do this? There's no way. And it took a surprise, but having the dialogue was so much better up front. And then having it on our radar and working together as a team and staying as a team to make things happen that benefited her and then ultimately benefited the organization.
DC?
Thank you. That's great, Karen. The best example I can give is about one of the questions it asks us about an Office 5 is around employee benefits and kind of staff benefit packages and how well people think we provide those as an organisation. And we were getting lower scores than we thought we should, and it was really quite confusing to us. We were thinking, why don't people see all the perks of working here? And when we spoke to people, we realised it's because we didn't tell them the benefits of working here. And as obvious as it sounds, we as a senior leadership team knew all these benefits, and some of these things are amazing in terms of the way that the level of pension contribution they get, the amount of sick pay they get if they need it, the flexibility they have with the working hours, etc., the training and development opportunities. But actually, we weren't very good at telling people about that. So in my monthly staff briefings, we put a slide together and actually presented the kind of 15 or so really great perks of working for us as an organisation. And two really interesting things happened. Firstly, we realised we'd forgotten about 4 perks, which our staff in that staff briefing pointed out to us, which even we hadn't understood, and they saw that as a perk of working for us. But then the scores for staff benefits and how well they liked working for us went massively in Office 5, because we'd actually put back in front of them all of these benefits. The other outcome, which was really great, is we also said, particularly for a lot of our younger staff, where they don't think about, for example, a great contributory pension scheme as being a benefit because they're 18, 19, 20, and it's 50 years off retiring, we asked them about what other benefits they thought they would like. And the biggest thing that came back was about time to exercise whilst working. So we then introduced something which we call happy hour, where every member of staff gets an hour a week, which we pay them to exercise. So every member of staff can take an hour off work with us paying them, therefore it removes the excuse of not being able to exercise because I don't have the time, because if they don't exercise for at least an hour a week, they're working an hour longer than they need to. But it was a real surprise to us, people giving us feedback about, we don't think there's great perks of working with this organisation, but it was a really great wake-up call for us. We're just not communicating the perks to our staff.
And that's brilliant. It goes back to your point earlier that perception's reality. Their perception was this benefit package sucks. And you're like, what? And then you realize they just don't know all the benefits. But I love the fact too, like sometimes you just don't, and I think this is a flaw in leadership. Sometimes, as leaders, especially like our panelists, we're just driven. We just work. We do what we do. We work hard. We don't mind staying up late, giving the extra. We sometimes have to remind ourselves that our staff doesn't always feel the same way. They see things differently. They're not as invested. And to your point of where you wouldn't have ever thought like, I should get 1 hour to exercise and be paid for it. That's not how we're wired. But that made a huge difference to the staff. I love that. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, and if you see, the office vibe feedback we get, when people are asked a question about what are the benefits of working here, 90% of staff will mention happy hour.
That's crazy.
It's one of the things that consistently is mentioned as a perk of working here now, which is great.
It's when you mentioned happy hour, Marissa's ears lit up. Then you explained it meant exercising and not having cocktails. And then she kind of frowned a little bit. Marissa, what do you think? Anytime you were just blown away?
Well,
or surprised,
after the happy hour, that's so great in so many ways, because not only then, are they happy about working there, but then they're seeing the product firsthand. So they're taking a class, they're on the equipment. Other members are seeing them in the club doing that and are impressed, like, oh, wow, there's so-and-so from the welcome desk. It's so great to see her there. And just like probably like you guys, when you're walking around the club and you're doing crunches on the floor and you see the dirt underneath the treadmill, it's a certain perspective that you normally wouldn't have in your role. So I just think that's really incredible. In general, I think the whole theme is really, and I think we may have discussed this at some point, was building a culture of trust with your employees. And, for Karen to take the time to sit down with people on a regular basis and really listen is going to build that culture of trust. So, there are certain companies where they, my sister works in HR and I've heard horror stories who like the best company to work for, but that's because you're forced to fill out the survey. And if you don't fill it out a certain way, things will go not good for you as an employee. So just having this atmosphere of trust, I think is going to be, it's kind of a circle, right? Because if you don't have that circle of trust, and they're not going to answer, but then you want to get their feedback. So you just have to, it's a continuous process. And I think when DC was sharing the thing about the benefits, that was a real strong theme that I heard from the people both at Goldman Sachs and at PayPal, because they have HR departments. Some of us don't have that luxury, but they work really hard to do this, but very often some of the people, the employees that benefit from the work that they do is not really acknowledged or realized. And so I think it's so important to be not only doing that in the onboarding, like here are all your benefits, and you do little assessments to evaluate their learning and their understanding of it, right? So instead of just presenting them with the employee handbook, you're actually asking them questions about it. You're interacting with them. You're assessing their knowledge. And then you have to regularly communicate those benefits on a regular basis. So even if it's like once a month, like, hey, did you know we do this? Because we do forget. And so that was a really strong point too, DC. I think that's really important. And then surprising information was just, we had that start, stop, continue that we did at Stevenson Fitness. We did, I think, have a good level of trust where people felt comfortable addressing, what's one thing Stevenson Fitness should start doing? What's one thing we should stop doing and one thing we should continue doing? And we did that by department. And, we were pleasantly surprised by the continued doing was just like doing all the cool things you're already doing to make members happy. I mean, we got a lot of fluff from the trainers about the song selections or the music that was playing in the gym on a regular basis. And that was like a sore subject because they hear the same song over and over again, but you're there for 8 hours and most of the members aren't there for 8 hours. So that's one thing that we're like, we didn't realize this is such a big deal to the trainers. They just really hated the music that we were playing, and such a fun and simple thing to try to fix. But just the culture of trust, I think, is the baseline.
So to that point, and I'll ask one, and sorry, this is a little unscripted, but DC, what do you think is one of the keys to building trust with your staff in this regard, to get the honest feedback?
I think you've mentioned, or Marissa just mentioned there about culture. So you've clearly got to create a culture where you treat people the way that you want to be treated, and you create an environment where people are comfortable to be honest with their feedback. And I guess you do that. That can sometimes take time because people are worried about speaking out if there hasn't been that culture before. But it goes back, I think, to one of the first points I made about is showing that you do listen to and act on that feedback. Because if you do that very quickly, you'll see a turning point in the organisation, because people realise it was worth mentioning that, because the leadership team or my line manager, whoever it is, has listened, a bit like Karen's example with her colleague, around, they have listened, they've understood it wasn't a scary thing to do, and I've seen a positive change as a result of it. The other thing that can be really useful, Chris, is about creating a set of values, however short they are. Ours spell out welcomes, for example, because that's what we want. We want to be welcoming, and they obviously the letters stand for different things. But that allows you, and our staff created those values themselves. It wasn't ones that I created and gave to them, but it allows you to kind of assess your business against something, and also assess that feedback both from your staff and your customers against those values. And that really helps because, we everything from our lifeguards picking me if I'm not living those values, to me picking the lifeguard up if they're not living those values. It allows people to do that in a safe kind of environment because that's what we've told people to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they always say there's no way to kill a culture quicker than to say it's one thing and do something else.
Yeah, and as a leader, you have to walk the walk.
Yep.
If you're not walking the walk, hypocrisy sets in, and there's nothing worse than me saying to my team, here's what we should be doing, and they see me doing the exact opposite of that. That would be the nail in the coffin.
Yep. Karen, how do you build that trust to get honest feedback?
Oh, it depends on, I think, like if you're talking about your management team to go to the frontline staff. So, with the frontline staff, since I'm a bit removed from them, it does take a little bit more time with them. And then also, I think like DC pointed out, like if they tell me something, I have to follow through. Just like they are the most important VIP that I've ever met in my life, I have to follow through with them and follow back to them so that builds that trust that they know I'm here for the better of everyone, not just for myself. And I think recognizing the staff helps with that they can see that, oh yeah, well, they recognize me for this. Why are, if someone else is there, why are you saying this? Because you could see it in your team too. And I know we need, I can't wait to do another survey. We're doing an informal survey here in our facility right now, but I like the formal ones as well, that you do have all the numbers that you can count on. But I think, to build that trust, you need to recognize their efforts. You need to treat them like DC, just respect, we're both here, we're on the same level. My job is just different than your job. And I think showing that and speaking with them and acknowledging them, not just running by that you have to go by this, or you don't have time in the office, or you're not going to see them. I think letting them know that when they're talking to you, you're looking at them, you're engaging with them, you're hearing what they have to say. I think that's a great way to start it, because it can be tough, depending where you're at in the organization. And especially, I want to bring up post-COVID. I mean, things change. We're leaner than we used to be. We had to make some tough decisions that, thank goodness we've had that culture in place to kind of keep building upon. And one thing that we started right after was, just simple recognition that helps build trust and a team, and that you care about them. I'll ask my management team, who should I recognize and for what? Especially since if I'm not seeing it. And so I have cards that I have, and I do a handwritten card. So they say that's what everyone wants. So I do whatever anybody wants. And I write the card and I write it to them specific about what they did and how much I appreciate them. And even though they may not see me all the time, I just want them to know it came from me, because I do appreciate them.
And I think you used an interesting word. You said, go ahead, DC.
I was going to say two more things. That's brilliant, Karen. And linked to that is saying thank you for the feedback helps build trust massively, because they actually realise that you've listened to it where it isn't anonymous. If you know who it is, actually taking the time to go in person and say thank you ever so much for that feedback, even if it was difficult feedback, good, bad, or indifferent. But saying thank you means, okay, it's been listened to, and we've had that dialogue. And where it is anonymous, keep reassuring people it's anonymous as well. Because to begin with, if you say it's anonymous, but people are worried that it isn't, that was still, even in an organisation like ours, where there's really good staff engagement, was that, well, is it really anonymous? Or are you going to know that I'm saying this if I'm going to say something that's difficult? But yeah, saying thank you makes such a difference. Thanking people for their feedback when they've taken the time to give it to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. And back to the word caring. And here we are in feel versus real. And sometimes caring can be sort of this nebulous word. But I recently reread the Lencioni book as about employee engagement, and just care about your people. That helps build a high level of trust. It take that relationship to an appropriate personal level. What'd you do this weekend? How are the kids? How was the marathon that you ran this weekend? Right. So just simply caring, as soft as that sounds, is super important. And I think, when we get busy and we've got a million things on our plate, and we are, like, as Karen pointed out, a couple layers away from some of that staff, when you go out there and you just get to know your people a little bit, that really helps build that level of trust. Marissa?
Well, I was just thinking about, when we're telling employees about how important feedback is, and we're thanking them and we're doing all of that. One of you mentioned earlier about walking the walk. We have to do that with our members. So if our employees see that we listen to members and we value difficult feedback, and we tell them, no, it's okay to get a complaint. You know why? Because this just helps us do better for more people. And so if they see us doing this with members, then they'll know that with them we'll do the same way. Because I think Chris had someone that he talked to that worked at a local competitor who said they took the suggestions and, like, threw them in the garbage or something. That was the employee was telling him that. And we're like, okay, that's terrible, A. But B, what message is that sending to the employee? Obviously, they don't value anyone's feedback. So just walking the walk with members. And then, I thought about, those difficult conversations that sometimes you might have with employees. It might be good to find diverse ways of getting feedback. Some people aren't comfortable with the one-on-one. As much as you want to have an open door, we worked really hard to have an open door policy and have people feel free to come and talk to us. And yet, for some people, that was just really challenging. So if there are other ways for them to provide feedback, so that it kind of goes with the kind of person that they are, then maybe we'll get pulse points at different areas. Because I know there are just some people that no matter how hard you work, just won't feel comfortable approaching you. We had a member come up to us one time and offered to be an ombudsman. Remember that? And he was going to be the conduit between employees and ourselves. And we're like, no, I don't think that's going to work. But even just, there are, like, if companies are struggling right now and this is not something that you've done, maybe having a third party come in and help you get started and getting the information might be a good way to just start the ball rolling, so that you start. And again, as everyone said a million times, you have to do something with that feedback. That's really the most important thing.
So one last thing I want to touch on before we sort of wrap things up is individual feedback for yourselves as leaders. And obviously you gain a lot of information from everything we've talked about today, but I was just wondering if just really briefly, because we're running out of time, if there's anything specifically you guys do to get feedback about yourselves. And one thing, by the way, for the listeners and the viewers, this came up on our last webinar, but I presented once with somebody, and we co-presented, and I had never presented with this person before. We got the feedback afterwards, and it was pretty good overall. Obviously there's always some people that will have some things that are more critical, but I reached out and I said, hey, did you see the feedback? And the presenter said, I never look at it. I just can't take it. I can't take it. If there's anything negative, it just shatters me. So I think one thing with feedback is you have to realize it's you can always learn from it, and you don't have to agree. We did a meeting, and we had a part-time yoga instructor who wasn't there that often, so she wasn't as immersed in the culture. And I had a great relationship with our operations manager, so we would tease each other, and I would tease her during a meeting very playfully. Well, in part of the post-meeting feedback, this yoga instructor had said, I don't like the way he treats Jetta. And when I heard that, I was like, you know what? I could see where she's coming from. She doesn't know us that well. She doesn't know we have this sort of relationship. where everyone else does. I get it. Now, did I all of a sudden, because I'm hilarious, did I all of a sudden stop being so funny? No, of course not. No, but I did start to think, I do have to be a little aware of who's in the audience when so I learned from that, but I didn't let it crush me and all of a sudden be like, I can never tell a joke again. So don't be afraid of feedback. It's only there to make you better. It's just hard. And the negative just weighs on us as human beings so heavily. So it's easy to just be afraid and let that really bring you down. Don't use it as a learning experience to improve. So back to the original question, Marissa, we'll start with you. Is there anything when you're in a leadership role that you would do proactively to get feedback about yourself and your skills?
Well, I mean, there could be like the start, stop, continue that you could do with your staff. There's also different like anonymous ones, like use one, write one word to describe my leadership style, and they would put it like in a box so that you kind of get like a sense of where you are. It really would depend. Is your goal to improve as a leader? Is your goal for them to see, why you have a certain management style? You really need to think about why you're asking what you're asking, and then tailor it to best fit that need.
Awesome. Karen, anything real quick?
What I've done is ask them, what's my hallway reputation? So I did battlefield leadership, and he taught us that. It's like, well, what's my hallway reputation? That means like when I walk down the hall at school, what's everyone saying about me? And again, yeah. I mean, you take it to only, you have to go in to receiving feedback, just like anytime we get feedback, with the right mindset. If you're not in the right mindset, don't read it yet. Don't look at it. Get in the right mindset, and then it can really only enhance you.
That's a really solid point. And Marissa and I talk about this all the time with decision making. If you had a bad day, you don't feel well, or things just aren't going right, or your kids are giving you, hassling you, and then all of a sudden you're faced with a decision, you're going to respond differently than you would if you had a great day and a great night of sleep and felt great, just came off a good workout. So I think that's that is really insightful. Be in the right state of mind when you're going to review that feedback. That's brilliant. DC, take us home with this.
Last thing from me on this. What I do, I've probably got 6 to 8 people in my organisation at different levels and different job roles, where they are almost a representative for that job role or that area, who you have an even greater relationship with in terms of garnering that feedback. So, for example, I would go to our fitness team, and I always know there's that one person, get on and talk to everybody, but you've got one who will just be honest with you and be comfortable being honest with you about things, good and indifferent, and will almost represent the views of that area. And the same with my sports development team, and the same with my marketing team. So that really helps. And often either before a presentation or before we're going to do something, or afterwards as well, go straight to those people and say, how did that land? What do people think? A bit like you said about the hallway kind of conversation. What do people think? What are people talking about? And that became really important when COVID hit. And in this country, I don't know if you had something similar in the States, something called a furlough scheme was introduced, where the government paid 80% of the staff's wages. And, but people were then at risk of redundancy once they were on furlough, so trying to understand how we communicated that message, how people felt after that, so we could reassure them they weren't going to lose their jobs. Was a really important thing, by using those key staff to give us that feedback and be the eyes and the ears of the organisation, really.
Awesome. So we're running out of time, but I do want you guys to give one final thought to the listener. So David, we'll stay with you because you're on a roll. In a couple sentences, what should somebody listening to this do the minute they log off this webinar?
So I think make some actions about what to do. My tips would be either look at Office Vibe as a tool to start using for free, because it does a lot of the work for you. But if you weren't going to do that, I think a really simple survey to do is ask your employees 3 things they like about working for you and 3 things they think you could improve, and put the answers of those into word cloud, like Marissa said earlier. And what you see straight away is common themes for the good stuff and the not so good stuff. Pick the top one that comes out of that and start working on it. And you'll see a big change in staff happiness and employee engagement just by doing that.
That's brilliant. Karen, couple sentences.
Just real quick, I think that was brilliant what DC said. And I would just say, go out there and start recognizing your teams, saying thank you, and just start building it from there.
Awesome. And Marissa, this better be good because you're last. So don't mess this up.
I just think you need to, if you're a small company, then you need to figure out, and like most of us are running lean, like Karen said, is this something that you can take on right now? And do you have the bandwidth, or is there someone else in the organization that has the bandwidth Because if you're going to do it, you might as well do it right, not just because you listen to a webinar and you want to do that. And maybe there are other things that you can let go of right now. This is one of those, the, the Covey things. It's important, but not urgent. So it's one of those things that will often go on the back burner. And maybe DC, you were mentioning, maybe that's why not a lot of people are doing that. You know, it's important, but right now you're just drowning. You know, a lot of people are, after Karen mentioned, after COVID. So maybe you don't have the bandwidth to do it right now, but set a time where you can think about when to do it and how.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much, Marissa, DC, and Karen. You guys were phenomenal, valuable information. What I love the most is it's stuff you guys are doing. So it's very actionable. It wasn't theory or hypothesis. You're like, hey, here's what we're doing, and this works. So I think it has a lot of value to the listeners. I want to thank ASF for making this possible. Not only do they put out good products and services, but also putting out educational content to help our industry grow. I think that's phenomenal, and we appreciate you. I do want to tell you that we'll have our 4th and final episode of this Real versus Feel series on May 26th at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And it's going to be an episode that brings everything together, because knowledge is great, but if you don't take action. So it'll summarize the first 3 episodes and really get action oriented and how we can improve our facilities through that. So thank you again, panelists. You guys are incredible. Thank you, listeners. We know you have a lot of choices when it comes to education, and we're grateful that you chose to be here with us today. We know time is a commodity, and we're grateful that you spent it with us. So thank you so much for being here, and now go out there and get back to changing lives. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.